So I think maybe the questions, we'll take them at a later stage from now so that we can have the next speaker to come in. But please, if you still have your questions, please write them down so that we can put them together. For now, I would want to bring Mr. Tawanda Chambakwe, who is the director of Zimbabwe Flying Labs, Technologies and Robotics Innovation Hub. So probably from his end, we're going to have a Zimbabwean perspective of how drones have been used, probably with understanding also with the key challenges which we are having in Zimbabwe. The theme of his presentation is Drones in Africa, Zimbabwean Context. Thank you. Mr. Chambakwe, please get through.
Thank you. Can you just allow screen sharing so I can share the slides?
Okay, thank you. I think it has been fixed. You can go on, sir.
Okay. Thank you. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen, sir.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for the platform to everyone at the team at TelOne who's organized this conference. I also want to thank the previous speaker. There were some really important, topics that he touched on, especially as it relates to the contextual approach in terms of how we adopt ICTs. Also looking at, the evidence-based adoption of ICTs. My presentation, and I think my role today is really to look at the Zimbabwean context and really building on the perspective that everything that we employ from a technology perspective must meet the need at the end of the day to improve food security and ensure that we have better quality as well as more food on the table. And I think as Zimbabwe, we are privileged in that we have the right kind of natural environment for it, but it requires us then to, build upon that platform that we have and grow from there. So looking quickly at the context of our discussion today and my presentation is really looking at how do we enhance food security in the local context in Zimbabwe. Looking just briefly at some of the work that we have been involved with and some of our work as an organization that is locally based and providing services in the agricultural space using the technology. It's important that we understand the context. And I was quite pleased to hear a lot of the previous speakers touch on the importance of employing tools and technologies like drones that allow us to then get accurate data and information that allows us to make data-driven decisions. And that's really the thrust of our work. So part of what we do, Precision Aerial, essentially is a commercial drone service provider. We are based here in Zimbabwe, but also provide services to other countries within the Southern Africa region. We're also the country license holders for Zimbabwe Flying Labs, which was mentioned previously at the point of introduction. And really, we have a broad base in terms of what we look at and the services we provide in the different spheres of commercial drone operations, as well as looking at humanitarian and social impact through our division, Zimbabwe Flying Labs, as well as our training partners, which is the Global Air Drone Academy, a partnership that we have with an international training company in the US. Now, looking at our work, one of the previous speakers also mentioned the link between the work that we do or that needs to be done and work that has already been put out as guidelines through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And some of the projects and the work that we're involved with really is aimed at goals number 2 and 8, where we're looking at how do we ensure zero hunger as well as promote decent work and economic growth. So that is really the thrust of the different things that we're involved with. And looking at our strategic partnership with the Flying Labs, Zimbabwe Flying Labs was recently established by Precision Aerial and is actually a network of hubs and innovation hubs that are spread throughout the world. We're currently in 32 countries now. And one of the previous speakers, I think Rombaldi, made reference to the work being done in agriculture. through some of our partner flying labs in other countries. Now, looking at the Zimbabwean context, there was made mention of what is a drone. And I think in terms of covering essentially what a drone is, a good way and context to look at when we look at drone technology is really looking at it from the perspective of how it is governed and regulated globally, then across the continent, as well as in Zimbabwe. So drone in itself, for those who may not be fully aware of it, who may have seen it but not have had any experience with the drone itself, it's important to understand that a drone is essentially an aircraft. Okay, it is classified under aviation, and a lot of the regulations and laws around that are classified from an aviation perspective. Now, once we understand that, it helps us to then look and see all the different things that are required for us to have implementation on the ground. Now, when we look at the classification and regulation in Zimbabwe, we have regulations in Zimbabwe, and our guiding principle really for the regulations in Zimbabwe is Statutory Instrument 271 of 2018. And this is governed by the regulator, which is the Civil Aviation Authority of Zimbabwe, under the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure Development. Now, when we look at the current status of regulations in Zimbabwe, we do have regulations that are in place that govern the use of drones. However, what is not apparent there out in the public space is the awareness of it. Not everyone is aware of the requirements of those who want to operate drones. And in that regard, then it limits the extent to which people can operate, and also limits the extent to which the technology is actually being adopted at scale. So if you want to have a better understanding of how drones should be regulated and operated, then you can make reference to the statutory instrument. But some of the quick things that I think that are at a low level that for us to understand for this presentation is that there's a requirement within the laws for training of those who want to operate drones, be it in agriculture or whatever industry you want to apply the technology in. That training then must lead to a process where someone is actually licensed to operate a drone. In a similar fashion, you would find in other industries, be it engineers or other professionals, they have to actually have a certification to say that this is what they're able to do. That is the same with the drone technology here in Zimbabwe. And that is also taken not from our own perspective, but from a global perspective of how drones are used and operated in other countries. Now, there was mention of the link between the International Civil Aviation Organization. At the top, you see ICAO. They're the ones who set out the guidelines of how drones are operated. That is then brought down to Acts of Parliament, which then translate to our civil aviation regulations. And then it gets more technical as we look in terms of standards to say, okay, the size of the drone, the payload that it's carrying, the sensors, etc., and then they're regulated in that way. Now, looking quickly at the global context, this is just some projections that were made by the United Nations, which was referenced earlier by one of the previous keynote speakers. And really what we're looking at is how do we add value to the work that is being done already in agriculture? How do we leverage the technology to bring that in and then create the much needed value and efficiency that allows us to do more, to have more and better quality food? And at the end of the day, we are really looking at the smart farming practices and principles. And around that, it's important to understand that the drone itself and drone technology for agriculture is specifically a tool that is used in a broader base of tools that are used for smart farming practices. Drones have sensors, but they work in conjunction with other sensors, be it plant sensors, be it smart tractors, to help us gain information and data that allows us to make better decisions. So it's really a part of a broader system and not really a complete and holistic solution on its own. Now, we touched on the different use cases for drones, and I think they've been mentioned by a number of the different speakers. But what is really happening on the ground here in Zimbabwe? To what extent have we actually adopted the technology? and in what ways is it being used. And that's really what we want to look at and build upon. But while looking at that, we must look at the perspective of the drone being one, a tool to deliver solutions, as well as a data acquisition platform that allows data-driven decision making. The different types of drones were highlighted and mentioned previously, but this is just an overview to show you the classification of the different types of drones and what they're used for. We have at the top there mapping and the surveillance platform. These come in different forms, be it what we call quadcopters or fixed wing platforms that allow us to actually map out and have surveillance over large scale areas, be it for smallholder or the larger scale kind of farming operations. We also then have multispectral type drones that have multispectral cameras on them that allow us to get centimeter grade accuracy in terms of being able to identify pests or on crops, or make an assessment of the crop and plant health in itself. And these are really tools that are helping farmers on the ground only if and when they are used appropriately and presented in a way that makes sense to the farmer. Too often we have the technology, but it's not trickled down, and there isn't enough education and training done with the actual end users in how they can actually leverage the data and what they do at the end of the day. For example, a multispectral drone, when you do large-scale mapping or mapping of your farm, that data and information is good and useful only when it's translated in the right format, and also when you do a ground truthing process. So a drone can show us at a high level that there's possibly an issue in a given area, but it's important to also go and be on the ground and actually make a physical assessment and a visual assessment on the ground of what's really going on with the plants. So the drone is not the answer to necessarily everything, but it's a very good tool to use to help us to do things a lot quicker and more efficiently. Then the popular one is the crop sprayer and seeder drone. And we'll highlight a bit more about that later. The crop sprayer in itself is really being used to spray, pesticides and fertilizers, as well as seeding is now taking place as well. And some of this work is actually being done here in Zimbabwe. Now, the use case applications from a broad base, how are drones being used in the space? Like I mentioned, the plant and health and crop monitoring, livestock monitoring. So you can imagine where you have large amounts of livestock, what we can actually then do is use the drone to actually fly over that, be it a large paddock or field where the livestock are, and actually do an actual count without having to do a physical count, which manually would take time and require more resources. But now with the drone, we can map over it and then use software and AI-driven platforms that can just easily count the numbers for us. We also have field mapping and crop scouting. We have boundary mapping, and you can imagine where you have either a new farmer or where you want to demarcate a different section or different crops in different areas, then that is a very important tool to have there. For irrigation planning as well, so we can create base maps that allow us to then map out where the actual irrigation should go in. We also are involved with crop spraying, as I mentioned, then pest identification, seeding and planting. And then there's the use case for insurance, which I think the previous speaker alluded to, in terms of us being able to get accurate data and information. One, as the farmer, when you want to insure your farm or your farming area. And secondly, in the case or event of a claim when it's required. Because now at least we no longer need to rely on estimations. You can actually have very accurate reporting on the extent of whatever damage, be it by flooding or by fire or whatever has happened in that context on your farm. Then the drone is a useful tool as well for security. And there's been mention of the term eye in the sky. And really it is a tool that can enhance the security on your farm because of the ability to get to places a lot quicker, to have that aerial perspective, and drones are relatively silent the higher it goes in the air. Then looking quickly at the benefits and some of the things that have been mentioned before, but the thing that I would highlight, which is really one of the things that we found in some of the work that we've been doing with our farmers, is the safety in terms of human resources. So the benefit of using crop spraying drones, for example, versus your handheld knapsacks, and to some extent the boom sprayers, is that we're able to remove the risk to the actual people who are doing the work, because we can actually set our crop sprayers to autonomously fly a certain flight mission over your farm, and without having to have the necessary additional personal protective equipment and masks and all the different things that come with inhaling or possibly having exposure to the pesticides and the herbicides. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, and we're seeing that some of our clients here in Zimbabwe are really seeing that as a benefit. It also reduces the amount of time. Time is a big thing. Time translates to money to a large extent, but not in every case. So at scale, when you adopt drone technology or crop sprayers in that use case, especially where you have a knapsack as the tool that you're using to actually spray your crops, the drones are able to do it between 10 to 15 times faster in terms of spraying. So in a given hectare, we are able to cover, things like 5 to 6 hectares per hour, versus the traditional one person with a knapsack being able to cover possibly 0.8 to a hectare a day. So that's really bringing efficiency and time saving and cost saving to the farmers that we work with. Then an important point, which I've heard mentioned by many of the previous speakers, which is an important perspective to have even when we look at the technology, is it's not really about the drone. There's too much emphasis that is put on the actual drone itself. And this might also be part and parcel of the process of us understanding the technology as a country and as people who are involved in the agricultural space. Is the focus is put on the drone, whereas we are only using the drone for the most part as a tool to gather data. Now, previously, where you have larger scale kind of operations, people can employ the use of satellite imagery. Satellite imagery has its limits in terms of resolution and accuracy, and that's really where the drone comes in, because it can give up to 1 to 2 centimeter accuracy on average with the type of drones that we have. And that is literally being able to see, little pests on the leaves of your crops, and that really has high value when applied with other tools to ensure that we boost our yields, make sure that we have the right estimation of what kind of crop is going to come out, or what we can expect, and when we're looking at trying to mitigate issues that are happening on our farms. So let's remember that it's really about the data at the end of the day. These are just some of the examples of some of the maps that we generate and we create in the process of us doing our mapping. And these kind of maps are useful in different contexts and for different applications. Some of them, which are more popularly known by people who are more technical when it comes to the actual data that people gather on farms. We have your NDVI, AutoMosaic, as well as just a general map and then a digital surface model. So you can imagine if you are starting at the beginning of your farming season, what we then speak to our farmers and some of the people we're working with around Zimbabwe is, let's apply the tool or the different tools at different stages of the process. So at the beginning of your farming season, you want to carry out just a general base map, which then shows us, and if you've never actually mapped out your farm or wherever you're carrying out farming operations, it will be important to get what we call elevation data, which really is our surface model there that allows us to see where are the potential areas where water is going to run off when you're doing irrigation. Where should we build our trenches? Where should we demarcate where we build actual farm structures? And where is the best kind of area for us to actually put our specific crops? So that kind of map is just a base map, which is important and a very important tool to use when you want to go out. And then as your crop is growing, then we come in and we do other kind of maps and data and information that then assess, for example, after you've irrigated, we're able to then fly over that particular farm and then give data and information around the moisture level, and also things like runoff to be able to see, okay, yes, we've irrigated, but not everywhere in terms of your crops has actually gotten what it needs. So those are important kind of tools that are actually quite useful when we look at the different use cases for drones and aerial mapping. And this is a good one, an example that we have here of how you can actually use the data information towards the end of the cycle when it's time for harvesting. Is you can then go over and fly over and create another map. And this map tells us through this vegetation index here that shows the green areas. You see the green areas highlighted there. That shows the crop that is, obviously ready to be harvested. And then it shows the areas and the crops where you probably need to leave it in maybe for a couple of days or so, depending on the crop that is in the ground. So these are some of the tools where we can actually employ the use of this technology to help us just in terms of how we boost our actual yields at the end of the day. Now, looking quickly at the drone use in Zimbabwe, there are different ways in which drones are being used. The first one that I'm going to highlight here, and I'm just going to share my screen with you, just to show you one of the crop spraying platforms that we have here and how it works. Hopefully you can see my screen. So this is a crop sprayer. So this one has you see the size of that has a 15-liter payload capacity. So as you can see, that's our crop sprayer. This one in particular, this one has a 15-liter payload capacity and has the ability to spray between 4 to 5 hectares per hour, depending on the use case. But what's important also is the context, is how does this relate to the Zimbabwean context? There are no drone manufacturers of these crop sprayers in Zimbabwe yet. That is a clear opportunity for anyone who's in the engineering space, or anyone who's in university or as a project. This would be an important advantage to actually be able to build our own. These platforms, most of the drones that people use, especially across Africa, are from the Asian kind of countries, but they're not adapted for the African context. So often what we have to do is, if you look on the edge there, where the actual nozzles are, where the actual liquid is being sprayed, there oftentimes we have to make modifications to the sprayer to ensure that we can get the different variable sprays required by the farmers on the ground. And this is some of the work that we found in terms of us bringing in the technology and then assuming that it's out of the box and it will work appropriately. That is not the case most of the time, especially as it relates to crop spraying platforms. You will probably need to do some sort of modifications that are not necessarily difficult to do, but that understanding is important. So in that process as well, it gives us opportunity to see how the technology works, as well as to localize the technology and hopefully move to a place where in Zimbabwe we can actually build and manufacture our own. There are 1 or 2 people or companies here in Zimbabwe that are actually actively exploring the manufacturing of these crop spraying drones so as to increase its use, because this is a clear advantage and a clear win if we can have this kind of technology available. Then I'll just draw your attention quickly here. This is one of our other clients where we're doing a harvest, near harvest assessment. You can see there that some of the crop there, particularly wheat, is part of it is ready to harvest, the other part isn't. And then you've got fresh crop there, which is the more greener side. So this is part of what we do just in terms of mapping out different farms and different areas, and then being able to assign the resources accordingly to where they need to go. Then also we look at some of the work that we do with some of our farmers and customers in as it relates to irrigation. This is an irrigation kind of project where we're helping to map out the different areas in terms of crops, as well as how we are assessing also the impact of the irrigation in specific spaces. So this is part of the project that we recently completed in Mazoe, and where we're working with some of the farmers there specifically to give them aerial insights on their farming platform. So this is just an overview and representation of some of the work that's being done in this space and in this area. Then lastly, I will show you one of the projects that we completed in, I think, in Darwindale as well, with some of our other clients, as well as the work that it's, the value that it's bringing to them, even specifically when it relates to how they manage their farming operations and do assessments. So this is part of the work that we were doing just in terms of tracking, a bit of tracking and tracing using aerial imagery or aerial videos specifically on the farm. So over and above the different use cases that are being employed here in Zimbabwe, there's still, I think, very little adoption that is actually happening on the ground. From what we've seen so far, there's only really about 3 or 4 companies that have or that are actively, building out drone technology programs and offering the services here in Zimbabwe. And yes, they're doing great work, but there is need for greater capacity in terms of building the capacity. And there are a number of different things that need to come into play for us to really see the implementation of drones in Zimbabwe. I'm just moving back now to my presentation and highlighting some of the things that we've seen in the African context. And as you can see here, what's highlighted here is the active role that women are playing, especially in emerging technology like drones. These are some of the young women who are actively getting involved in, being part and parcel of delivering services with drone technology. So it's encouraging to see this happen in other countries, but we need to see more of that here in Zimbabwe. We need to see more young people, more women getting involved in this space. I'm yet to see a woman who's actively involved in this use of drones for agriculture in Zimbabwe, but the opportunity is there, and I think there's a great need for that, and there's great platforms where we can actually engage and support that kind of work. Now, looking quickly at global trends as we progress towards the outlook of what we can expect to see, there is the growth of AI-powered technology, where we are seeing, the drones being able to communicate with smart tractors without any actual intervention from people. We're also seeing large scale tree seeding and crop planting for reforestation and land reclamation. And the use case there in terms of value, especially in the context of tobacco and the current processes in Zimbabwe, where there's a lot of land and trees that are being cut down, for the curing process. Drones can be used as a tool that is fast and efficient that helps us to do reforestation and land reclamation in that way. But it needs to be adopted naturally at scale. And an important component really is working with the support of the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, the future of drone use in Zimbabwe, we will see widespread use and adoption of it. The real question is, when and how. Because like we mentioned, the important starting point is understanding the regulations, understanding them from a point of not trying to necessarily change them, but first understand the need for regulation, the need for the control of how they're used. Then we can also then unlock the value where we can then, do the yield estimations, we can deal with pests, we can map our boundaries, we can monitor livestock and improve security on our farms. What are the opportunities? Now, looking quickly at opportunities, the previous speakers have been mentioning and speaking at length about the role of youth and how youth can get involved in ICTs, especially for agriculture. Here, we're highlighting part of the opportunities here is leapfrogging the infrastructure gap. In Zimbabwe and across Africa, there is a question about infrastructure. Is to say that our infrastructure, though it is good, it needs to be improved. And one of the ways that we can leapfrog some of the gaps in our infrastructure is to say that, all right, even in areas where we haven't been able to fully employ irrigation or pivots or have large-scale boom sprayers, we can bring in the technology like drones, which then helps us to scale the way that we use technology efficiently, as well as to deliver value to small scale as well as large scale farmers, leveraging off the technology and not having to go through all the different steps and processes. Another area is job creation. And one of the things that we highlight as well, especially through our training and consultancy programs, is to say that there is a bit too much focus on the drone pilot being an operator, whereas there are other opportunities in terms of value that people can that people can actually get involved with, just in terms of roles. So young people specifically, you can be a drone pilot, yes, but we also need, specifically for agriculture, we need data analysts. Like we mentioned, it's really about the data. So anyone who's studying data science or data analysis, those are the kind of skill sets we need to people to come in and actually process the data that's gathered by drones. There's also the need for developing drone software. We offer drone data processing services as an organization. However, the data software platforms that we use are third-party software developed by people in other countries, be it America, Europe, or Asia. We need software developers to actually employ their skill set towards building platforms that allow us to process data here. This is a growing trend across Africa, just through some of our networks and partnerships that we have, is seeing that young people are really trying to develop their own platforms, especially as it relates to processing and analyzing data. Then there's also the drone design and development. There's quite a big gap here, especially in the African context, and also in Zimbabwe, where we need engineers, we need designers, we need industrial designers, and a number of different people to come together, as well as those people involved in the drone space who understand the technology, like drone pilots and that kind of thing, to come together and actually develop a locally made crop spraying drone or drone that's useful for mapping. It's not something that is difficult, but it requires us to employ the skill set as well as pull together resources. There was mention of an innovation fund. These are some of the projects that we could actually fund, which actually have a tangible real life impact at the end of the day, that we can then actually track and trace from start to finish, to say we are actually going to establish our own crop spraying drone, which will add value in the local context. Then there's opportunity for repair and maintenance technicians, people who actually repair drones. This is a growing actual demand. We actually receive a number of requests from different companies, here in Zimbabwe, as well as, across Southern Africa, requesting and asking, do you repair drones? Can you repair? And, repair maintenance technicians really, this is actually a career path you could pursue, and that could really be a job that you pursue. You may never even need to fly the drone itself. You just focus on repair and maintenance. Then we have drone educators, and part of the process in our work is really education. So even this presentation is part of an education process where we're trying to bring more awareness around the technology and a better understanding of the technology beyond what is, what you would see from, just doing your general, Google or desktop research. Then the challenges. So we're looking quickly at the challenges here, right? As I've mentioned before, is the mindset is important. The moment I tell people that the drone is an aircraft, people, often struggle, and they're like, no, it's used, because they're so used to seeing drones being used as a tool to take photos and videos at, occasions, events, weddings, etc. That there's limited knowledge and understanding of the actual commercial applications, the extent to which the technology goes. Drones in themselves, yes, are a tool. Yes, they're aircraft, but used in the right way, in the right manner, can deliver value in ways that we are still even, developing and understanding as we go. There's poor understanding of regulations, which I also made mention of, and also understanding that in all the countries where we see development taking place, we often look abroad and say, okay, these countries are doing well and they're advancing in this, but they're doing it in the context of the regulations or with special waivers and permissions to go and test out those projects and test out the technology in the way they see it. So those are some of the things we need to look at. Then also there's the high cost of hardware and software. And I'll make mention of this just soon after this, is really the barrier to entry initially when you want to employ the different types of drones. In some cases, you'll find that for the effective use of the technology, you need to purchase an aerial mapping drone as well as a crop spraying drone. The drones cannot do the same thing. So you can't have the crop sprayer be the one that's doing the aerial surveillance. That is not a reality yet. I'm sure with time that will be developed, but that is not something that is readily available. So you'll have to buy two different drone platforms, which is important to know and understand. Then you must understand the capacities and limitations of those different drones, as well as the requirements to understand the regulations on how much weight can they carry, etc. So these are important considerations. Then there's too much emphasis, on hardware and little training on software. We're in the process of developing training programs that are really geared towards a holistic approach in terms of understanding the technology, and software is an important aspect. As we've spoken about data being the real value that we're trying to derive, then the software, understanding the software, the data processing and analysis is really, really important. Then there's limited knowledge on the benefits of using the technology, and through platforms like this that are being created and developed by TelOne, this also helps everyone to have a better understanding of some of the things that they've been seeing online, but how it actually applies practically on the ground. Then in terms of drone pilots and operators, in my own personal capacity as a licensed drone pilot and a drone professional, I obtained my license, but about 2 years ago. But after obtaining my license or going through that process, it became clear and apparent that that process of licensing, getting a drone pilot license, is one part of a greater and broader requirement for training. So having a license does not determine your ability to actually apply the technology in the given industry use case. So having a license doesn't mean you automatically know how to use drones for agriculture. So we had to pursue training, and I pursued training across the different industries so that I could get certification for using drones for agriculture. And now we're trying to build programs that add that value. So even if you have your license, you still need to get trained on how drones are used for agriculture. It's an important thing that needs to be taken note of. Then there's the copycat approach versus contextual innovation approach. And really, this is the thrust of the whole conversation, is to say, we can't take platforms that we see in other countries, in other contexts, and just say, oh, this works there, so let's bring it here. We must understand the landscape. We must understand the needs. We must understand the value that we're trying to bring to the people. We must speak to the actual farmers and see what are their needs, what are their requirements. Rather than selling, or rather than bringing in a solution looking for a problem, we must start with what are the challenges and how can we add value leveraging off this technology. Then from a perspective of working with the regulator as well as the Ministry of Agriculture, as well as institutions like TelOne Center for Learning, is awareness and education about drones and regulations. This is what needs to be done. We also need to use existing systems and networks to grow the use of technology. So through our agriculture extension officers, those are some people we should be targeting to do training, in terms of districts and that kind of thing, so that they are aware and understand how the technology works and how we can add value. In many cases, what we recommend, even when we're consulting, is to say, yes, fair and fine, not every single farmer can employ or purchase a drone to have on their farm. It's not feasible or practical, but we have a good system and base where we can have it at community level, where you pull together 10 or 15 farmers. And then, today we're doing crop spraying on farmer A, tomorrow we're on farmer B, tomorrow on farmer C. But because we can do it a lot more faster and efficiently, then we're adding value to the community. We're adding value to the small scale farmers. Then an important point also is to consider engaging local communities about technology and get their buy-in. One of the things that we found when we were out in a project in Darwindale is, there was talk. We were doing, our client was really excited about the technology we were showing them. And there was a bit of murmuring though amongst the farm workers there, because, they started saying, this thing is going to take our jobs. Right. And these are important conversations to have, especially in a local context, because the perception is that you're removing the need for people, therefore people are losing jobs. Whereas we need to have the right conversation and perspective around the types of jobs or the work that we call work and jobs, as well as upskilling. How do we then have that conversation with the people who are already in the system in terms of giving them the skill set for them to have better quality jobs. So this is a broad conversation we need to have about the impact of technology and what it does to employment and that kind of thing. For the most part, we look at it as being able to create employment, but it's a different type of employment than what has existed previously. Then one of the things that we are really a strong part of what our work really is trying to do is to see how do we get agriculture drones classified as agricultural equipment. The cost of bringing drones right now, there is a requirement to pay duty and tax on a specific drone. And also there's different taxes depending on the type of payload or sensor or camera or weight and that kind of thing. And that makes the cost very high. Now, there's a clear classification within the drone space to say this is an agricultural drone. And if it is coming in as an agricultural drone, i.e. your crop sprayers, then what we need is for that to be classified as agricultural equipment. Then we can benefit from the different waivers around bringing in the equipment. The same with a tractor or any other kind of platform. Then a national drone program for agriculture. Even as we've mentioned, things like Fumfuza farming practices that have been adopted at scale, national scale, which started off, just a small group of people doing it, and now it's a national kind of thrust. These are things that we also need to look at, is to say, how do we do it at scale? How do we ensure that we have it at district level, at provincial level? How do we make sure that the technology is there and we have people who are trained, who know how to do it? We have repair maintenance technicians. We have data processing going on at that level. So really that's how we can look and see and look at how the technology can be adopted at scale from a national perspective. So what next? In conclusion, really what our thrust and even just some of the work that we are looking at doing just with TelOne and in partnership with them and TelOne Center for Learning is how do we add value? We are operating and we are in the space. However, we understand that there is a need for a broader base and understanding for people to have of the actual value that it brings, not from a perceived value perspective. So we are available and offering a number of different platforms through our services, which is really education based. We are currently running a platform for free consultation where we actually go and look at or assess the needs of an organization and make recommendations of how they can employ it, or if they even should employ the technology. Because it's not to say that everyone should just employ it immediately. There is a time and there's a scale in which it must be done. Then we also have agricultural drone courses that we've just developed. And then we also are involved in, leveraging off the understanding and the knowledge base that we're building through our connections across Africa and the world. And then lastly, also, this is a good resource. This is a book that was recently published last month, which I was privileged enough to have been featured as one of the speakers here. And it has actually done quite well from a global perspective. And I think it's a good resource tool that you may want to look at getting to give you a broader understanding of how technology or drone technology is being used, not only in Zimbabwe and not only in agriculture, but also in other spaces and ways, especially across other industries. But looking specifically at agriculture, this is also a good tool to use as a reference point. Then we have the courses that I mentioned. So we currently have 2 main courses that we've developed in a local context. And this covers a lot of what we're shared about in terms of regulations, how do we navigate it, the actual training requirements, the licensing requirements, and a number of different things just in terms of data, software, aerial mapping, crop spraying, etc. So these are some of the courses we're currently running. And then we have an overarching course, which is really for organizations, that looks at how do we, how do organizations employ, and what is the duty of care required by an organization to actually use drones. The regulations outline the responsibility of organizations or companies to actually be licensed to operate drones beyond the personnel, in other words, the drone pilot. Beyond the drone pilot, the organization itself must be licensed to actually operate drones. So we cover a lot of those different things, especially as it relates to safety, systems, and operational planning or operations manuals of how we actually need to implement the technology, who should do it, what kind of training, how often do they need to get trained, and what are the, what is the scope of their work in essence. Then we also have platforms where we give out free knowledge training sessions. So our next training session, our free session, is on the 30th of March, where we will be just discussing in detail about drone training, the requirements to become a drone pilot, the professional drone training courses, the basic competency courses. So these are some of the things that we cover. So we have a topic that we run at least once a month, where we just offer free information for anyone who wants to know and understand, who has any questions. And we always make sure that we discuss it from a professional perspective, and invite people who are actually licensed and trained to actually offer that kind of information. And I think that's it in conclusion. We are available to have any discussions around any specific needs of how do we implement this technology in a local context. So I'll just hand over now to the Master of Ceremonies, and just thank you all for your time.
Hello, thank you so much for this insightful and exciting part of how drones are used in agriculture. It seems that the people that were quite excited, and they have so many questions regarding what drones can be able to do, and to what extent can you be able also to collaborate with some of them. I shall start with maybe the first question, which goes, does one have to go through certification for the use of drones used in recreational services, such as weddings, capturing photos of landscapes, or surveillance? It's for you, Mr. Chambakwe.
Yeah, so the guidelines in the regulations on the use of drones, that's Statutory Instrument 271 of 2018, they actually stipulate that for any use of drones of a commercial nature, that is for a hire or reward, under any category or any industry, you would need to have a license specifically for that. So if you want to offer a service, you need to actually be trained and licensed. If you want to operate your drone recreationally, in other words, at home, or maybe you go on holiday and in a private space, then that is your own business. But there are guidelines even in the regulations about recreational use.
Interesting. Thank you, Abba. So just to ask out of the blue, most of these drones which are being sold off like we see many drones being driven around, are those people complying, or maybe they're just doing it off the hook?
Yeah, for the most part, just in terms of our guidance, we take all our guidance from the regulations, as well as the regulations in the African context and global context. The operation and use of drones in Zimbabwe right now, for the most part, is being done by people who are trained and who are not trained or licensed to operate the drones. And as I mentioned before, really the work is on conscientizing the public and making the public aware of their need and obligation to adhere to the regulations. But for the most part, just from our research, there's only about maybe about 8 or 9 licensed drone pilots in the country right now.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that. Seems like you have got many questions, so just stick with us. I'll ask one by one. The next question, because we are having people on Facebook who are having also sub-questions on that. So the second question is, how can Zimbabwean commercial farmers access drones to cut down costs, as highlighted by Mr. Chambakwe? It's just one of those questions which people are asking in the chat area.
Okay, so I'll make maybe reference to say we are offering the consultation service. We don't like to prescribe a solution. We would rather look at the specific context of each person, because everyone has different specific needs that they need. So yes, you can do research online, but I would say definitely try and reach out to either ourselves or anyone else who's involved in the space, and then get an accurate assessment of what you need.
Okay, thank you so much on that one. Then the next question goes, what is the capacity of the drones in chemical spraying in terms of time and money?
Capacity-wise, there's a range. So we talk about payload, is how much can the drone carry, and that's classified in liters. So normally they start off at about 5 liters, and right now we've seen platforms that can carry up to about 25 liters. So you've got that kind of range to choose from between 5 and 25 liters. And then in terms of price, your starting cost and price for the lower end, you're looking at maybe about 3,000 US dollars. And depending on the manufacturer and the different brands that are available and the one that you select, the cost can go all the way up to $25,000 to $30,000 for one.
Wow. Okay. Then from there, we've got a question to do. Can we safely say we have drones that are able to predict yield data in Zimbabwe?
I can safely say that there are drones with the capacity to do that. However, the drone does not do it on its own. It requires people who are trained to be able to use the drone as well as the software, and because really it's the software that would then give us that yield estimation. But in terms of the actual drone platforms, yes, they are there. But do we have the people trained to do that? That is a different question.
Maybe on my personal side, just to understand, can artificial intelligence be used, like, for example, to do remote and without any intervention of humans, to use these drones in terms of, because somehow, to my understanding, it requires a drone pilot, which means there's human intervention. Is there any point where, at any point, where these drones can be able to just pilot themselves without any human intervention?
Yeah, without getting technical, when you look at the link between using drones and smart tractors, for example, what the smart tractor can't do and the drone can't do is switch itself on, right? So at that point, you have that human intervention. But what then happens is after you've switched it on, then, yes, can it take over and do what it needs to do? It definitely requires some sort of input information from people, and then after that you can leave it to do what it needs to do.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Then the other question from the panel goes, do drones have sizes in terms of capacities to cater farmers from small scale going up? I think, yes, you, at some extent, you gave it justice on the previous question, but probably if you can have something maybe to add in, if you have.
Yes, they're different sizes. So they're what we call within the global drone hardware space. There are so many different types of drones. Then there are what we call agricultural drones, right? So that are actually specifically made to deliver services for agriculture. So in that regard, you have different sizes, you have different types, you have different, like I mentioned before, we have, fixed wing kind of drones, and then you have the quadcopters, which have the propellers. You also have the crop sprayers, which then have, obviously the payload, which is the tanks underneath where you put the liquid inside. So there are different sizes, different types, depending specifically on your needs.
Depending on the specific use. So that's true.
My emphasis is on the needs, understanding the.
Okay. All right. So your last question, Mr. Chambakwe, goes, there are other questions, sorry, which are coming in. So far I have one, which goes, can one easily get licensing to fly drones for agriculture and other applications from cars, or are there any conditions to be met?
Yeah, the license, for you to get licensed, you have to be trained by an approved training school to actually get your license. That is the requirement for you to get your license. Then after you get your license, as I mentioned, you then need to take a professional training course for drones in agriculture.
Okay, right, this one, okay, there's another question coming from Facebook, but I'll try to read it. Maybe it might be repetitive, but if it is, maybe we will let it out. But it goes like this. If one is to use drone for spraying chemicals, what are the cost implications in relation to the cost per hectare? I think you did answer that part. Then the reasoning is on maintaining low costs per hectare, also in comparison in existing technology that is already there, such as the use of boom sprayers. I think you gave it a bit of some justice on the previous question you answered. So let me skip on this one. The other question goes, although although this is an agriculture-based conference, your input is important via policing of vast access network. We are under heavy attack from thieves targeting our corporate network. Can this drone technology be adapted and offer effective surveillance to prevent such rampant vandalism?
Yeah, the simple answer to that is yes.
Okay, and noted. I get that. All right, sir. So maybe since already we have covered much about this, the conversation is expected to go on further. We have a pretty exciting interactive session after lunch, where we're going to now, after all this discussion we have made, we're going now to try to build up to say, okay, this is the basis of what we have understood what is there, and this is where we are coming from. This is maybe what we need to do in the future. So we will do sort of like a fusion session for the session we just had.